Ahoy! It's time for the faded leather stuff video. Now you might be wondering, why do I need to know how to work leather? I'm not a cowboy. I'm a knight. Yeah. Now I know what you're thinking. BC, you don't look like a knight. You look like a bootleg Power Ranger. And I do. That's by design. But what this gear is for a sport called HEMA, or Historical European Martial Arts. Basically, we study ancient manuscripts on sword fighting, usually long sword fighting, but other weapons as well. And then we try to recreate those fighting styles in real life as an actual martial arts with weapons. And boy howdy do I have a lot of weapons. So many, in fact, I don't have enough hands to hold them. So what do the ancient manuscripts say to do when you don't have enough arms for your weapons? Make a belt, idiot. All right, let's make a belt. So my only other attempt at doing this was this guy, which is not really a belt, more of a subpar dog collar. This uses some scrap leather that I got from a friend. It has my Chicago screws in there. But the real thing that keeps this from being useful literally at all is this bit right here. This is cheap Chinesium. It is also way too big to effectively be anything but a subpar dog collar. So naturally this isn't going to work when I'm sword fighting people, so we're not going to go with a design like this. What we are going to do is we're going to go with a much simpler design that just uses this metal ring and this very big length of leather that is perfect for a belt, but doesn't really fit on camera. So you're mostly just going to be seeing the tip. So essentially the idea behind this design is, as I understand it, a very old design used by Vikings and barbarians and other people that were too stupid to make buckles. But essentially what you do is you loop it through there, and then you have just a long piece of leather with a ring on the end, and there's a simple knot that you can kind of thread the other end through, and you have yourself a functioning belt. So really the only thing we need to do is make the holes for our Chicago screws, which might be easier said than done, given that we're going through 2 layers and this is some pretty thick leather, but I think I have a solution. Said solution is I'm going to hit it with a hammer until it fits. All right, let's see if I can do this without bashing my thumb. But we basically just need to kind of convince the leather to be cooperative. Just give it some nice little love taps there. Give it a little tenderizing. Does that look like it's going to cooperate? Yeah, maybe. Just a few more little drummings right there. Hopefully none of my neighbors complain about this. Who am I kidding? They're constantly vacuuming their floors and rolling around on computer chairs. A little hammering is not going to hurt them. All right, let's see if that can fit in the leather press. Feeling pretty good about that. Yeah, a little convincing. So just to show off to you folks at home how this thing works. So I have my Chicago screw right here, which is actually 2 parts. So there's a little threaded bit right there. And I need to find something
It's going to be probably a little bit smaller than this, so there's a nice little bit of pressure as I shove it through, and then you can just kind of adjust it. There we go. Get it to click into place. Probably want something bigger than that. Probably something around there. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna just click that around until that's the one facing the bottom. There we go. And I'm gonna shove my leather in there and then ka-chunk. Let's see if I can show you that process. Hey, new camera angle unlocked. All right, so I have the end of the leather belt here, and we're gonna want this choked up on this metal bit right here. So I'm gonna try to put my holes about right there and right there. If I really don't like the way it's fitting together, I could probably afford to put a third hole in there. I have quite a bit of Chicago screws, but we're gonna play that part by ear. So yeah, let's get this jammed in there. Okay, that's looking good. And you know, if you're a professional, you'd probably want to, like, you know, do some measurements, align this like just so, but you know, I'm just making this for funsies. So I'm really just kind of figuring out this process. And as long as it has enough structural integrity, I think I'm going to be fine, even if it is a little messy looking. Ah, yeah, there we go. And sometimes, especially when you're going through multiple layers, you'll need to do one punch on one side and then another punch on the other side, just to really drive it through. I'm going to move that ring out of the way. Makes it a little bit easier to maneuver. Just spin this around. Okay. And you guys can see that probably way easier now, so. There we go. Work that out. And yeah, now we have a hole to put our Chicago screw through. All right, I went ahead and punched the other hole off camera, but basically the way these Chicago screws work is you cram them through the hole, and then there's this second bit right here, which looks more like a traditional screw. Get that into focus there. But essentially, they come together like so, and hold your two pieces of leather together. Naturally, that'd be screwed in more, but we're just gonna get this bit in here, which I used a shorter one. I have pretty wide variety, just because I want this to be pretty tight. And if I can't cram this in by hand, I might punch a slightly wider hole to kind of clear out some of that material, or I might just hit it with a hammer again. We'll see. Okay, so as it turns out, the solution was to go up several sizes with the leather punch, which honestly kind of bums me out, because it would have been funny if the solution was just hitting it with a hammer again. But now we should be able to jam these guys through. I say, as I jinx myself, because this worked off camera and I haven't tested the other holes yet. But you may be wondering why these things are called Chicago screws. Well, there's an interesting story behind that. Is, you see, back in the olden days in Europe, they didn't have these, obviously, for leatherworking, because Chicago is in America. And it was actually Christopher Columbus, after he sailed over in 1492 and discovered the city of Chicago here in the United States, that he actually learned about the process of making Chicago screws from the Native Americans. You don't hear about that in the history books because, you know, like systemic racism and stuff. But I think that's added to like school curriculums now. Anyway, even though I got these guys to the right size, I want these bits here, and I don't have the little screw head to be the one facing outward. I don't have a particular reason for that. If that's wrong, yell at me in the comments. But we're gonna... there we go. Yeah. I'm learning how to work this thing quite a bit in this project. And there we go. Yeah, if there's one thing I've learned is that it's very easy to undershoot how big a hole should be. There we go. Okay. So, we got... Oh yeah, now this one's going to be difficult. And interrupt the flow of the video. There we go. All right, now let's screw this in and have it reach functionable belt status. All right, so something I learned when I was making the dog collar was that if you don't do it right, which I'm still trying to figure out what right is, it doesn't really hold in place, and these guys can shift around quite a bit. If I can get that into focus, you can see how they're just kind of freewheeling there in the leather, and I don't want that to happen on this belt. So the solution I'm going to try, I'm going to hold it in place with a pair of pliers as I batten down the hatches. And there we go. That holds in a lot better than the dog collar. I think mostly because I used the properly spaced Chicago screws. This is just some hardier leather. And yeah, that guy's, well, he's got a little bit of give. But I guess time will tell how durable this build ends up being. So as is, this is a fully functional belt. But it's not very pretty. We want it to be pretty because half of being a knight is looking cool. So we're gonna make this look cool.